Gaywyck by Vincent Verga. Publisher Allison Books, Los Angeles, New York. Narrator Eric Aust. A human moan set the air vibrating with grief. Sitting in a fold of sandy dune, Keyes was convulsed by sorrow. Beside him sat Brian, holding his hand. "Look," Denvers commanded, pointing at the dead body. "You said Danough saw him last." Transfixed, I stared at Jones. Seaweed and sea scum were tangled in his matted hair. His bulging, colorless eyes were seemingly detached from the rest of his glabrous, swollen body. They stared back at me. Forcing myself to concentrate, I was able to comprehend that his head was not where it belonged. Snapped free of the spine, it rested on his chest like a flower, dangling on its broken stem. A sea spider slowly emerged from his open blue mouth, while the sun glinted on the chained gold dragon embedded in his skin. Sickened, I turned away. "I never said that, Danvers. He told me he was planning to see Danough. That's all I know." Removing myself, I walked back along the shore, hugging the surf. Coming toward me from the house was Cale, leading Dr. Anders. Some others I had never seen followed. Claiming Cale, I nodded to them and continued walking, passing the stone jetty, passing the bathhouse, walking in the clean air, trying to erase the numbing image of watery death. He must have gone swimming after leaving me, which is why he never saw Danough, I reasoned. But there was something wrong, something out of order. I could see nothing beyond the bulging eyes and the voracious sea spider, deserting its petrified host. This horror added monstrous ramifications to Denver's claim that Danough was a stranger to the truth. The sea was unclean, heaving its churned bottom onto the cluttered shore. I walked in a wavy line, following its scalloped, lacy edge, until turning up a trodden path into the dunes. In a few minutes, I stood at the door to Nanny Wells' cottage. I heard her welcoming Cale before expectantly calling Danough's name. I called out my own and entered as she bade me to. I could no longer contain the grief I felt. I started to sob. She led me to a chair where I proceeded to break down completely, able only to mutter a broken litany of "Poor Jones, poor Jones, poor Jones." "The arrogant pup was out way over his head," she said, "just like him." "You knew him, Nanny?" Denvers brought the scamp to tea. Had some hold over the old fool. The usual one, I presumed. Always favored the rough ones, he did. He loved Cormac best, but to the end kept insisting it was Danough he treasured. That was the cause of the trouble. It was. I didn't take to Jones at all. I can tell you. Oh, poor Jones, I thought. Had he no friends but those clawing old men? During breakfast, I tried to pry more information from Nanny Wells about Denvers and Cormac, but she became guarded and uneasy. I changed the subject, leaving soon after the meal's conclusion. I was devastated by the death of Jones. On my way back to the main house, I paused. The wall where he and I had talked about Cormac's death. All his clever plans had come to nothing. I remembered him vibrant and smiling, draped in sweet pea. And then, this morning, draped in seaweed. I had to sit on a stile to calm my pounding head. There I remembered other things. Jones coming along the wall from swimming in the salty sea, untangling his beloved gold chain and pendant dragon, kept dry and safe in his trouser pocket. That chain was his most precious possession. He would never willingly have gone into the water with it around his neck. Yet his corpse wore it. I could see it glinting in the sun with the sea spider. I rose and ran back toward the house, taking deep breaths to keep down my sobs. I refused to draw any conclusions. I did not want to know. A troop of gardeners and laborers were cleaning the back lawn and the surrounding gardens. I joined them to pass the morning until Danough arrived. I learned the body had been taken to the doctor's office for a surgeon from New York to perform the autopsy. I worked furiously hard, avoiding contact with anyone from the household until Brian sought me out, and instead I stopped for lunch. He had packed some sandwiches. We walked to the gazebo, but several men were removing the dead willow. We walked to the pond. The swans had 4 cygnets in their wake. I smiled for the first time that day. Brian spoke in a whisper. Denver says Danough did it. That's absurd. How could he? Why? Blackmail. He says Danough killed him. I don't believe it, I shouted, starting to rage. I think they're both crazy. I always have. At 3 o'clock, Danough arrived with Goodbody, setting in as unofficial counsel. They had gone first to Dr. Anders and then to Sheriff Rooney to organize an inquest, at which time the autopsy report would be heard. While we 3 friends sat alone at tea, Sheriff Rooney appeared to inform us the inquest was arranged for 10 the next morning in his office. So soon, I mumbled, feeling light-headed from the image of Denver's, like Adrian, fondling the plucked heart of his dead Antonius. The sooner the better, Goodbody snapped officiously. I excused myself and went immediately to my rooms. I had a heartache and wanted to rest before I made myself too ill to attend the inquest. I drew a hot bath and liberally scattered bath salts, thinking myself safe from everyone. I took a headache powder and submerged my stiff back into the tub. Brian was the first to visit. He came to apologize for having upset me and to borrow Oz. He repeated his opinion of Denver's and Key's. He told me not to worry. Danough would take care of everything. Then Goodbody appeared, wishing to make certain I was in order. He had thought me strange at tea. Then Denver's tapped at the door. He looked worse than I felt. I told him of my sorrow over his loss. I came to make certain you were speaking at the inquest. Yes, of course I am, if anyone wants me to. I do. I may have a great deal to say, and I may want your corroborating evidence. I looked away from his glazed eyes. I could say nothing after he left. I forced myself to wash with a coarse cloth to improve my circulation, but it did nothing for my head and little for my disposition. I resolved to visit Danough. I would share this growing alarm with him. May I come in? He called from the bedroom. I was just coming out. He tossed me a towel and with another began rubbing my back. Noticing the tension in my shoulders, he spread his warm, strong hands across them, massaging the muscles there. He insisted I recline on the bed, where he continued to massage the tightness from my back and neck and legs in silence until I spoke. I can't believe Jones is dead. Why are you so upset by this? You told me you hated him. Yes, but I didn't want him dead. I'm sorry, Robbie. Forgive me. It will soon be over. Denver thinks you killed him. What? What are you saying? He stopped massaging my calves, but did not remove his hands. I think he's going to tell them at the inquest. Why would I? Blackmail. Jones was planning to blackmail you. There are no grounds. I've done nothing wrong. Nothing that wrong. I stared at him. He had flushed scarlet. His profound confusion shattered my concentration. He released my legs and sat on the edge of the bed. I put on my robe and sat close to him. What about Cormac's death? Jones said he knew the truth about Cormac's death. What is the truth? He died in a fire with my father. Ow. I took his hand. Please, Danough, tell me the truth. He lay back across the bed. I leaned over him, touching his expressionless face. I kissed him on the mouth. He did not respond. Without moving, he began to speak very slowly. Cormac started the fire. It was an accident. He didn't want to die. He'd found my father drunk and soaked the room with cognac to teach him a lesson, I suppose, or maybe from anger. He hated my father's drinking, so did I. My father was an ugly drunk. He slipped with the lamp. They both burned to death, while Cormac was trying to drag him out of it. Who told you this? Denvers and Annie Wells. They heard the screams and were there at the end. Where were you? I was asleep in my room. How could Denvers think that I could... He hugged me to him. I kissed him again. He's not well, Danough. He's not himself. He's crazed. But why? He loved Jones. They were involved. He pulled away and sat up. He won't say anything to hurt me. He already has, I thought. The inquest was a horrid business, although it took less than half an hour. The men who found the body were present, as well as Jones's sister, several officials, the doctor, and the 5 of us from the house. Denvers did not speak. He sat rigidly throughout and never uttered a sound. Only Keyes wept. The doctor reported a great quantity of water in the boy's lungs that confirmed death by drowning. Jones's sister offered a letter as evidence from the boy that he wished to leave Gaywyck. I was a key witness. If the boy was leaving of his own free will and under no duress, as I swore, then there could be no question of doubt. His demise was ruled a misadventure. A good body left immediately for the train, but Danough remained at Gaywyck until the following morning to make certain all was well. Denvers had visited Annie Wells. She managed to appease his wrath. Danough wanted to speak with his tutor, but the distraught man refused to see him. After luncheon, I went to the waterfall. The laborers had finished with that area and were now working among the fruit trees. The paths were cleared, and I detoured to the pond to visit the cygnets with Crust the bread. He was waiting for me in the hammock, wearing only his wristwatch. Reading Gray's Anatomy, we did not speak. I love you, I sighed afterward. He nodded, squeezing me very tightly before disengaging himself and silently taking his leave. I called to him. He turned and smiled. My heart rocked with joy. Stay, I called after him. Please stay. Stay, he echoed with a fleeting smile. I prithee tell me what thou thinkest of me, he recited laughingly. I am not what I am. I would you were as I would have you be. Would it be better, lad, than I am? I wish I might, for now I am your fool. I love you, I said, and he smiled wider, fuller, exposing his beautiful teeth. Then he was gone. Stretching my full length, I relaxed for the moment. I was satisfied. The scent of his body clung to me. My muscles felt him still. His caress hovered, outlining myself. Springing from the hammock, I dived into the water while under the cool surface, among the water lily roots. I imagined drowning and was afraid. His lungs had been filled with water. Diving from the rocks? Had he broken his neck, perhaps, and drowned? Or had a cramp disabled and drowned him? His broken neck a result of the storm's tearing, pulling currents? I scampered up the rocks and sat under the waterfall. I still had my doubts, but no one to pin them on. Poor Jonesy. Danough and I had tea in silence. He was exhausted and depressed. It started to rain. Instead of our planned walk, we settled in the small downstairs study, making desultory conversation until the clock rang 6. I suggested a hot bath before dinner. We separated, meeting again to dine in silence. I had never seen him so withdrawn. Over coffee in front of a fire, I offered to read to him. He smiled gratefully, but said no. I sat back in my chair and left him to his thoughts, hoping they were of me. The clock struck 9. I suggested we go to bed. He did not argue. We walked up the central staircase, pausing to look at the moon through the oval window. The rain had cleaned the sky of clouds. He stood by my side. I love you, I thought. The first time you held me was on this staircase. Do you remember? He took my hand. I don't know how I've survived without your love, Robert. Just give me a little more time. I've given you everything else, I thought. Why not time as well? All my life, I said. He raised my hand to his lips and kissed it with such sweet reverence that a quick tenderness vibrated through me. I love you, Danough. He closed his eyes and nodded. The moonlight covered his face like a silver mask. Please try to understand, he pleaded, suddenly weeping. There is no reason for you to cry. No reason. My life isn't reason enough. He turned from me and ascended the steps. I called to him. When he turned, he smiled. My heart swelled with joy. I love you, I said. He nodded and disappeared into the shadows. I went up to my room. I wanted to go for a walk, but instead ran another hot bath and sprinkled it with a scented powder. I wanted to understand his plan. Unless I could, I knew I would never understand him. Love is prestige for him. Do you understand? He's just beginning to accept. Beginning to accept. Accept. He must accept, and quickly, I thought, growing impatient. The mask endures as the face itself. Dried and powdered, brooding, I strolled naked into my bedroom and was startled to see him sitting on my bed. He wore a silver silk Japanese dressing gown, distressed and disheveled. He looked in the grip of torment. I felt shy. Suddenly, ashamed by my nudity, when he nervously glanced away from me, scurrying under the covers, I waited for him to speak. Danough, I said, patience in it. Will you come into bed and hold me the way you used to do? I'm far beneath such innocent play, he said huskily. I can't breathe in here. Open the windows. Yes, I will. Thank you. He crossed to them and pushed one fully open. I noticed his bare legs with their delicate ankles, so slim for such a large, muscular man like a fine Irish stallion. I felt nervous and frightened, uncertain of what words might soothe him. I felt angry and impotent over my inability to take his pain away from him. My love seemed useless. Suddenly, speaking loudly and adamantly, he said without looking at me, I cannot live with the world's disapprobation. I was stunned. This reality had never occurred to me. Must we acknowledge it, Danough? It's like your father said. There are only two kinds of people, those who love and those who do not. That was fine for my father, and for Cormac, and for Goodbody and Mortimer, and for millions of others. But not for me, he whispered, leaning against the open French window. We'll continue as we were, I thought. My love will change all this. I called to him, stretching out my arms. Crossing to me, he allowed an embrace, then pulled quickly away. His robe fell open, revealing his familiar need. But he drew together the ends of the silk garment and hurried from the room. I did not sleep again that night. I wrote in my journal, then paced the length of my apartment, weeping for us both. The next morning, on the sod beneath the hammock, he was more frenzied and wild than I had ever known him. There was a violence that twice caused me to cry out in pain. Both times he cradled me in his arms, apologizing between fervent kisses and whisperings. He wanted to give more pleasure than I had ever known. He wanted me to forgive him for being weak, frightened, the cowardly animal he was. Instantly, he left me to dive into the pool. He always waited for several minutes, continuing his gentle caresses while provoking, teasing, grateful kisses. I sat up and watched him swim to the cascade, where he stretched under the shower, calling Cale to mind. Before disappearing into the cave inside, he stood studying the drawings. Do you like these? He asked. Yes, I answered shyly, barely glancing at the coarse pornography. At first, they frightened me. No. Now? Now they excite me. Which one frightened you? I pointed. He smiled. Pulling me to him, he pressed me down to the ground. Why should this frighten you? When we could speak sensibly again, I said foolishly, "If only your fears were as pleasantly dismissed." As soon as I spoke, I regretted it. He stood and strode under the falls again. He disappeared, and I shouted his name in a panic. He stepped back toward me, the water coursing down his body, making paths in its thick, curly hair. "It's best during the day, when we're alone like this," he said, kneeling by me. "I think I can tolerate anything with you. I love you, Robert." "Who gives a damn about the world's probation?" I nodded. He looked amused and laughed to prove it. His laughter echoed eerily in the confines of the cave. "I understand." No, you don't, Robert." I knelt opposite him. He put his hands on my shoulder. "Don't ask any questions, Robert. Be grateful for what you have, my darling." I started to weep. "Why are you crying?" You see, no one ever called me darling before." He laughed again and kissed me. "But," I said, what about what we have?" "That sounds like a question," I thought, closing my eyes, listening to him leave. He decided to stay one more day. I was determined to ask no questions. He walked along the shore, talking of love. He told me about Stephen, his father's last protege, the one passionate love of his father's life. "What happened to Stephen?" "The week before the fire, they had a fight. He left here in the middle of the night. My father followed, but the last weekend he came back alone." Cormac rejoiced. "Why?" "Like Denver's, he hated Stephen. They hated everyone my father loved, often including me. That last day, when Cormac asked after Stephen, my father said he went to Europe." "Were there many proteges?" "Yes, and guardians, ostensibly for us, but actually for my father's pleasure. Stephen lasted the longest, nearly 10 years. I believed he really loved him. The night I was born, my mother found my father with a protege in his study. She tried to drown herself. He saved her. Often, I wish he had not. We were together constantly. He wanted to talk. I was content to listen. It drew us closer. He held my hand, touched my face, and kissed me spontaneously, often throughout the day. After lunch, we rode the horses and exercised in my gymnasium, showering together. After tea, we walked to the white oaks on the wrought iron bench at sunset. He kissed me with such loving tenderness that 1,000 ecstatic couplings by the waterfall were not worth its beauty. After dinner, we sat on the dolmen in the drunken garden, studying the sky. Denver's is a fervent admirer of Aratus with his descriptions of the Greek sky. Somewhere, there's a copy of Bayer's Eurymatria. Somewhere. There was. Is there still? My sweet librarian. Yes, all 51 plates extant. The astronomy books are now grouped in Library at 1. He laughed delighted, as though I'd done something extraordinary. Cormac was convinced everything is in the stars. He felt crushed by the enormity of it all. He pointed to the Corona Borealis and related Ariadne's betrayal on Naxos by Theseus, finding similarities between the Minotaur and Baum's Wicked Witch of the West, both incarnations of fear. Chance seemed everywhere. If Ariadne had not seen Theseus arrive in Crete, if the pail of water had not been at Dorothy Scales' hand, if Antonius had no grandfather in Nicomedia, if Father Howard had not known Father Collins. But occurrences are eternally reoccurring. I felt awed by the heavens, but not by the weight of circumstance. I could choose which move to make. Love grants us freedoms. The next morning I rode with him to the train. I had never indulged myself in that pleasure before, but this morning was different. We had joined deliriously at the waterfall before breakfast. We had wept for love of me. "I feel scorched," he said. "Did you think your heart asbestos?" I thought myself immune to happiness, and therefore to burns. After the train departed, I sat in the rear of the carriage in anguish. I felt as if I were hollow, as if my rational parts had gone with him. I craved him. My mouth felt dry. My heart pounded. My hands were trembling. I began to perspire heavily. This is love, I wondered, bemused. I'm more like an opium eater. I tried to force a laugh, but nothing was funny. I felt ghastly. I want him. That did not explain it. I need him. That was closer to the mark. But at least I've chosen my opium, Mortimer. I believe that I felt worse. Even I could see the transparency of the life. I realized with a chill that I was being untruthful to myself. It had never occurred to me that I might lie to myself. The mask had endured as the face itself. There is something wrong. I began to regain control of myself. My reason warned me. Obsession was repulsed for the moment. I admitted doubt. It was the beginning of my awakening. It was worth my life in the coin of the heart's realm. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.